citizens of the world. It's Michael James once again with another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. This one is being recorded on February 19th for the week of February 24th. And let me just say, February 19th is also the birthday of our wonderful engineer, Hal James, Hal Coltrane, Katie and James, one of my kids, and he's been a big help. And we're glad that on his birthday, he's taken time to help us record this show. Today we have two guests. I'm going to have Tommy Carden, who is from the Warehouse Workers, and he is going to talk about the Workers' Rights Film Festival and the auto workers, and we're going to learn a little bit about what's going on in the labor movement. And then we're going to have an old friend, Andy Pierce, come on. He is currently the host of a jazz show on WCPB, and that is the College of DuPage's broadcasting setup that is all jazz here in Chicago. So let's get going. A little bit of information. I'd like to follow up on a recent guest. We had Nathan Smith on from the Roman Susan Gallery, and he talked about Loyola buying a building on Loyola Avenue, Loyola University. It's a building that houses 30 some odd apartments and has two wonderful businesses, Susan Roman Gallery and Archie's Cafe. Archie's is the closest thing to the Heartland Cafe where I come out of. And Loyola plans to redevelop it, but it'll be years in the making. And there's a big attempt going on to get Loyola to consider not forcing everybody out so quickly. Apparently, the 49th Ward Alderwoman, Maria Haddon, and her office is trying to get landmark status to prevent the tenants and businesses from being displaced. That, I think, is from Block Club, and I think the information is correct. So it's a good thing that people are standing up for that. It's not a good thing that Loyola wants to take it down. On another front, not a very good thing. The Reader newspaper reports that an autonomous collective announced a mass boycott of the Logan Theater out in Logan Square after its owner, Mark Fishman, who rents out hundreds of residential and commercial properties, has attempted to evict resident tenant Manal Farhan for violating lease regulations by flying the Palestinian flag outside of her apartment. Stay tuned on that. It's a manifestation of this terrible war that's going on in Gaza, where now about 30,000 Palestinians have been killed in retaliation for a strike on Israel on October 7th. On the labor front, I went actually to a news bureau and I just put in labor strikes. And what I got was there was a one-day labor strike of rideshare drivers out at O'Hare and around the country on Valentine's Day. Flight attendants for major U.S. airlines are holding rallies at airports around the country to push for higher pay. The number of American workers hitting the picket lines more than doubled last year as unions have been flexing their muscles. The auto workers, who had a great contract, a big strike, and they came out with a good contract. But I hear now that auto workers threaten to strike again at Ford's huge Kentucky truck plant in a local contract dispute. And German labor unions have called for Lufthansa, the ground staff, to strike at 7 airports, actually beginning on Tuesday, which was the day after we record and a few days before the show airs. Another interesting thing is a move that should Illinois become the 11th state to adopt right to die legislation. Illinois Democrats have moved this forward. That would be Laura Fine from Glenview and Linda Holmes from Aurora. Allow people who are terminally ill an option to end their own lives. It's the medical aid in dying measure. It would work. The law would allow qualified individuals, not medical professionals, to self-administer a medication to end their lives. It would require doctors to inform patients about all the end-of-life options. The key context, the push for the legislation in Illinois began last fall, has been attempted in years past. Advocates, including ACLU here in Illinois, hope legislators will approve it this time around in the spring session. Okay, moving right along. You know, we do have an important election coming up. Election day is March 19th, and that's the primary And one of the things on that ballot is a measure you will only see on that ballot, Bring Chicago Home. And that's to tax sales of over $1 million, a transfer tax on building sales that would go then to help deal with the homeless question in this city. Also on the ballot, and we recently had David Orr, the former Cook County clerk, on, and he recommended that it would be very important for people to support Laetitia Tucker over Rogers in the Cook County Board of Review race. And on a sad note, two people we've known and were very important in their work here in the city. The longtime activist Chris Giovannis has passed, and Sherwin Kotofsky, who owned Sherwin's Health Food Store, which was really important in helping me formulate the ideas for the late great Heartland Cafe. He passed away the other day. So I think that'll be enough on the banter. We've got two guests coming up. The first one will be Tommy Carden of the Warehouse Workers for Justice, talking about the Workers' Rights Film Festival. And then we're going to have Andy Pierce come on talking jazz a little bit later. So we're going to take a musical break, probably a little bit of jazz, maybe from Fred Anderson. And we'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland for the week of February 24th. Welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's Live from the Heartland for the week of February 24th. And it gives me a lot of pleasure now to introduce a real activist out there doing good in the world, Tommy Carden of the Warehouse Workers for Justice. Good morning to you, Tommy.
Good morning, Michael. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to being here.
Well, it's good to have you. This started off with our friend Peter Kuttner, who I go way back with, talking about there was going to be a Workers' Rights Film Festival. And they were going to show a film about the United Auto Workers from 1970, Black Auto Workers Against Racism, finally got the news. And he hooked me up with you, who are, you're a guy who was real active in the labor movement and knows a little bit about this film festival. So let's start off with, tell me a little bit about what's Warehouse Workers for Justice. I like that slogan, Warehouse Workers for Justice. Nothing moves without us. Together, we can move toward a better future for all.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm currently the associate director at Warehouse Workers for Justice, and WWJ is a worker center. And we support warehouse workers who are organizing in the Chicagoland area for better, higher paying jobs, jobs of dignity, jobs that are healthy, jobs that are safe. And we were founded in 2008 by the United Electrical Workers Union. Mainly focus on reaching out to and supporting workers, organizing in sort of the main logistics clusters in the area. So in suburban Cook County, and in Will County, in and around Joliet in particular.
Well, tell me a little bit about worker centers in general. They seem to be, they're not a union, but they're like setups that help organizers and give direction, et cetera. Give us a little overview of the general worker center movement.
Absolutely. Yeah. So worker centers are usually nonprofits. So Warehouse Workers for Justice is a nonprofit. And worker centers really started emerging in the 90s, early 2000s, to sort of reach out to, I would say, workers that historically unions weren't organizing. So workers of color, immigrants, workers who were maybe a bit harder to organize, like temporary workers. A lot of warehouse workers, work through temporary agencies. So worker centers, we get funding from a variety of sources that allow us to sort of reach workers in different ways, whether that's around, sealing and expungement of criminal records, different health and safety resources we offer, really allow us to go out into the community and start talking with workers about their rights and start giving workers the tools they need to start to make changes directly in their workplaces. So we sort of teach workers their rights and teach workers how to build early organization that, we hope eventually will move towards unionization efforts within these warehouses.
You got the Warehouse Workers for Justice. There's another group, Chicago Jobs with Justice, and they have a workers' right board. Get me straight on what this all is about.
A lot of organizations, a lot of acronyms. One of these days, I'm going to get that tattoo sleeve where I have all of these, labor organizations acronyms on there, so I can get it right myself. But right, so Chicago Jobs with Justice, right, is a coalition of unions and worker centers and other workers' rights organizations in Chicago. Been around for decades, and it sort of served as a bridge, right, to bridge community, right, to bridge sort of non-union workers' rights organizations like worker centers and unions, right, to sort of build that community, to sort of ensure that all these groups are building together towards a Chicago where there's greater worker justice. And there's a sort of an auxiliary board of Chicago Jobs of Justice called the Workers' Rights Board. And that's the organization that Peter is also a part of. And sort of at the end of last year, this group, we started talking about, what can we do to sort of pull others into this work? What can we do to sort of, have conversations with union members, maybe with workers who aren't part of unions, with union organizers, other labor activists. What can we do to sort of bring people together in conversation and have some real conversations that connect with contemporary labor fights? And we really like the idea of a film series. So, pulling some screenings that take the moment we've been doing mostly documentaries, but taking a labor film that's maybe rooted in a struggle from some years ago, and finding out how to kind of pull things right from that film and find the points of relevancy for current struggles today. So the last film we had, we screened I Am Somebody and HSA Strike 75. And we screened both those films, and then we had a conversation with a number of different people. One person who was involved, in the actual strike in 75, Peter Orris. And we also had a conversation with people from INA, the Illinois Nurses Association, who are currently fighting against Howard Brown and a long kind of protracted fight they've been having going on for the past few months. And found a lot of nuggets from that film that are really relevant to current healthcare worker fights today. So the second film of the series is coming up on Thursday, February 29th at 6 o'clock. And we're going to be screening Finally Got the News from 1970, which I'm very excited about.
Well, you bring back a lot of memories from the old days when I would join Community Union, and even with Rising Up Angry, we used to use film, to get people involved. I remember the old UE Hall, United Electrical Workers, and they were a real progressive union then, and I probably still are.
Sure.
You mentioned they helped get your worker center started. But we used to get these films from the Republic Steel strike and a bunch of things and show to people to try to, connect what happened in the past to the future with a vision toward the future.
Totally.
What I got on, I remember this film. I don't know if I saw it, but it was the Detroit League of Revolutionary Black Workers.
That's right.
They were trying to build an independent group within the United Auto Workers. And the documentary catalogs the action taken to address racism that they experienced and issues encountered by all workers on the assembly line and in the union halls. You're going to have an old pal, also a guest on this show, Floyd Webb, who it turns out is not only a filmmaker, but had been a member of the United Auto Workers. And he's going to be at the film showing and leading a discussion with the audience. I think you're going to have some auto workers there too from local 55, 51.
That's right. Yep. We expect to have 2 workers from 551 joining us as well.
How did you get Floyd involved? Did Peter do that, or did you meet him?
Yeah, I actually have not met Floyd yet, but I'm looking forward to. But Peter got Floyd involved. And I think something we're hoping to do is we're hoping to pull together perspectives like Floyd's, who can speak to sort of what it was like being with, working as a UAW member closer to when this documentary occurred or when it was made. And we're really excited also to have, hopefully, like I said, these 2 current UAW members from Local 551 on the South Side to talk about their latest, their latest strike, right? The stand-up strike, which was certainly very consciously going back to the UAW's history, right? And sort of consciously pointing back to the sit-down strikes that were so instrumental in the 30s, but were also really, really instrumental for Black auto workers in the late 60s. that this film portrays. So really excited to see how we can connect both of those and see, what did the stand-up strikers of 2023 learn from the workers from Drum, the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement, and what can we learn from both of these efforts, right, in all of our future organizing efforts.
Well, Tommy, you have this labor film series is more than just the films that you had and the one that's coming up on February 29th. You want to give us a little hint about the other ones that are coming up?
Sure. So there's one, we're planning this by quarter. So we're in the sort of midst of planning sort of the next 3 months, April, May, and June. But I can speak to March. So March 19th, and I can send you this information. We're going to be screening Who Needs Sleep, the Haskell Wexler film from 2006. And we're going to be using that to talk about the conditions in the film industry for film crew workers. And we're going to be doing that screening and discussion at Columbia College.
Good. So let's just so people get it, this first film is going to be shown on February 29th, 6 to 8, Jobs with Justice at 333 South Ashland.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. Well, let's move along a little bit here.
Sure.
I find it interesting, the whole idea of the warehouse workers and a union for these workers. So what's the status of warehouse workers in general and the union movement in general that you'd like to share?
Sure. So I think it's important to note that like warehousing work, right, is sort of it's where a lot of new jobs, right, are in the economy, especially in Northeast Illinois, in the Chicagoland area. It's some of the most precarious work, right? So like I mentioned sort of earlier, a lot of warehouse workers, they are temporary workers, right? They're working through an agency, very unstable. If workers, begin to organize, oftentimes they're retaliated against. So I actually see a lot of connections between the work of organizing warehouse workers, which is largely a workforce made up of workers of color. So a lot of Black workers, a lot of Latino workers, a lot of immigrant workers. So sort of as I've been sort of watching this film and thinking about this discussion we're going to have on the 29th about it, I think something that keeps on coming back to me is sort of right the necessity for workers to engage in aggressive struggle. At Warehouse Workers for Justice, we work with workers all the time who are having issues at work, and we walk them through how to file complaints with different state agencies or federal agencies. But we always stress to workers that it's really important that they come together with their coworkers and they try to make that change directly on the shop floor. So working with warehouse workers on petition efforts, doing delegations, marching on their boss. And there's a lot of really great connections, I feel like, in this film. But warehousing, right, and this is sort of the reason why Warehouse Workers for Justice was founded by the UE, the United Electrical Workers, is that warehousing needs to be here, right? The way that these supply chains are constructed, right? These companies need warehouses at the very specific points they're at. And we believe that if workers can get organized, they can have real leverage to gain some really, really important and crucial concessions to make this industry a much better industry to work in.
Tommy Carden, let me ask you, what's the status of the union movement within the warehouse? Are there any warehouse setups, any Amazon, et cetera, that actually have a union that's functioning?
So there is a union in Staten Island, in the New York facility that has been covered pretty extensively in the media.
Right.
So that is the only unionized Amazon in the country right now.
Wow.
They're engaged in a really hard contract fight now, right? And even though they won their union, it's going to take a lot more pressure on the company, right? Not just at that facility, but across the country and across the world, to ensure that the workers, get that contract. Because we're seeing now is that Amazon is pulling out every trick in the book, every legal trick in the book to delay that. And try to call the legal existence of that union into question. So only one so far.
How about what's the stat? How many Amazon warehouse situations do we have in the Chicagoland area?
There's about there's close to 10 fulfillment centers in the area. There's many more delivery stations. So the way that Amazon works, right, is they have these big warehouses, right, where a lot of the product comes, and then they take that product to smaller delivery stations that there's many of them in Chicago, which is the last stop before the product gets to your house. I don't have a count of how many delivery stations, but there's
You have an
stuff.
idea how many workers are involved in all of these? How big a workforce they have?
They have each facility has about 2,000 workers. So
Wow.
they have I forget the exact numbers. It's in the tens of thousands. Amazon is the largest private employer in the Chicagoland area. They're the largest employer in Will County. So they
And
yeah,
no union.
no union. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, there will be. Oh,
Absolutely.
that's something else. I didn't realize how a lot of people have shifted to getting their stuff delivered to their door. I confess, that we use that here. You need something small. I
Yeah.
mean, or small or large. It certainly is not going to go away. While we like people going to stores, on the ground, uh, this is a kind of the way to the future. And are most of those 2,000 workers at each facility coming in through a temp agency? And do those temp agencies get a cut like the old day labor hiring halls in Uptown used to get? You'd go to work and they'd take most of your money.
Yeah. So Amazon moved away from temp agencies a few years ago. So they all hire directly now. But what you're talking about is the story for most other warehouse workers, frankly, that we deal with, that they're going through the agencies and the agencies taking a cut. And the workers' pay is very low, no benefits, right? Amazon has moved away from that, but there's a lot of other issues associated with working at Amazon that are a bit unique to Amazon because of all the sophisticated technology they use that while a lot of people might think that, oh, great, more technology will make the work better, it actually makes the work uh, it speeds up the work, right? So a lot of the tech that Amazon employs and the surveillance technology that they have in the facility, it serves to do, productivity monitoring. And again, there's connections between this, right, and the speed up that was happening on the lines, right, in the auto facilities in Detroit in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, Tommy, we could keep going, and I think I'd like to have you back. Let's wind it up with how about you giving us your overview of the current status of the labor movement in general?
Absolutely. Big question. I think something I'd like to touch on is that we've seen a lot of excitement, right, over the past 2, 3 years, right, referring to this labor upsurge. And I think there's been a lot of um, worker organizing has been a lot more in the news, right? And there are undoubtedly many more worker organizing efforts happening across the country, more union elections happening across the country. And while we haven't quite reversed the tick, right, tick down, we're very close to doing that. And I think it's within reach, right, within the next couple of years to grow the number of workers who are represented by unions across this country. But I think we need to point to examples like the UAW workers who weren't afraid of forming independent organizations, weren't afraid of taking aggressive struggle, taking the fight directly to their boss. I think making sure that all of our fights for worker justice are rooted in racial justice. I think those three things that this finally got the news teach us are going to be how we get back to a better labor movement in this country. So
Well, Tommy, I hope to meet you in person on February 29th, 6 p.m. Jobs with Justice, 333 South Ashland for that film festival. And I'm asking you right now if you'll come back on and talk a little bit more about not only future labor films, events, or progress in the labor movement.
absolutely, Michael. Happy to come on again.
Okay, brother. Keep on doing good in the world. It's great.
Appreciate it.
To the people. We'll be
Power
right
to the
back
people.
with more Live from the Heartland. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. Welcome back to the second segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of February 24th. And yesterday I had a visitor came over to my house, a longtime friend, Andy Pierce, and turns out he was looking for some postcards that I put out way back of Chicago jazz people, including one Fred Anderson. And Fred Anderson is a legendary figure in Chicago's music history, the late, great Fred Anderson. And I asked Andy, who it turns out now has a jazz show at midnight on WDCB. That's the College of DuPage's broadcasting setup. They're at 90.9 FM, and he's on at midnight with a neat show. So I asked him to come on the show. How are you, Andy?
I'm well, Michael. Thanks for having me.
You look like you're all set to broadcast over there. Is that your hair or your earphones on? I can't tell.
It's probably what's left of hair and ears.
I should make the picture bigger. Well, it was good to see you. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on around Fred Anderson and the late, great, not only late, great Fred Anderson, but the late, great Velvet Lounge.
Hey, thanks, Michael. I stopped by because you have one of the few postcards that were ever made of Fred. There are a couple other out there. I know University of Massachusetts had a jazz series. I think they had a postcard of him, maybe the Vision Festival in New York. But that photo from Lauren Deutsch that you printed in a series of jazz cards is really fantastic. And it's really it's Fred before a lot of us knew Fred. You kind of had to be in the know. I think that was a loft party he was playing then. He might have already had his Birdhouse Club on North Lincoln Avenue across from where the Old Town School is today. But he hadn't risen to the prominence that we knew him for in the 80s, 90s, 2000s when he had the Velvet Lounge. And that was his club on 22nd and Indiana that he had for a long time before he had to move it over to Cermak when they built a condo tower on that site. For those unfamiliar with Fred, he's a jazz saxophone player and composer who was really, as it's said in this album, he was really the missing link, somewhere between bebop and the avant-garde. A lot of what he did was self-taught. He had his own method for playing music and playing through the keys and playing through different things he wanted to do. If you listen to him, there are compositions. So we're going to celebrate him on his birthday this year, Saturday, March 23rd. Greg Ward is going to play some of his compositions. So we're celebrating Fred Anderson, the composer, at Constellation.
Was that the picture? Was that picture on that cover of Lauren's picture too?
It is. It is.
Yeah. That's the same as the postcard. You mentioned this postcard series. It was Heartland music cards we put out of the Heartland Cafe. But I was really glad that you remembered that not only that photo, but that whole series of cards, because they're a lot of fun and they are available at the Buddy store at the Cultural Center.
Sure.
And I know you're going to use them at this event, so that's good.
Yeah, it's nice to get them out there. You never know how somebody's going to get turned on to something. You having those on the spinner at the Heartland store all those years, people probably picked them up and then they wondered about the music, behind the person.
Let's hope
I know
so.
I had that postcard hanging in my cube at City Hall when I really got to know Fred, when he came in for his occupancy placard. And, I'm looking at the postcard on the cube wall and I'm hearing his voice at the front desk, right? And that was kind of a moment when we connected.
I remember Fred when he came to the Heartland and he played along with Hamid Drake and the great Charlie Hayden, Liberation Music Orchestra. And it was a benefit for the Nicaragua Solidarity Committee. And I think the film Fire from the Mountain. It was a great event. I do have a number of photos of Fred and Hamid and Hayden eating at the Heartland. Not all of them the greatest expression or focus, but I do have the documentation.
action
Let me
shots
ask you a little
at
bit
the
about
table.
your own involvement in music. How did you become a jazz fan? Uh, I didn't know that when I first knew you, and I haven't seen you for a while, but I've been following you on Facebook, etc. And I know you're deep into the music these days.
You know, I had a neighbor who played organ and played spoons, you know, uh,
Spoons. Right.
spoons. That's probably where I probably heard some of the first standards and jazz. Then at some point in a discount bin at a Karma Records, I saw an Anthony Braxton CD, and he was playing a contrabass clarinet, which, you know, I think I knew from band, but I'd never really seen one played in a jazz context. So that kind of got my interest. And then a high school girlfriend introduced me to the Velvet Lounge, and I'm pretty sure that I picked up the first CD Tatsu Aoki and Fred did together as a giveaway on WNUR. You know, it was like, here's a new CD release, come to the bop shop. And that's kind of where I got hooked.
How old were you?
Uh in my early 20s, after I moved to
Wow.
Chicago around 95, 96.
Yeah, I first started going to jazz shows. I used to go to the Village Vanguard and various places in New York in the late 50s. I went to Town Hall. I mean, I got to see, Cannonball Adderley. I got to see John Coltrane. I got to see Miles Davis. And who would know that later in my life I'd be running musical joints up here in Rogers Park for a while that would have the likes of Hamid Drake and Fred Anderson and Charlie Hayden, Tatsu Aoki, Nicole Mitchell, um, you know, Boykin, all kind of people. Uh,
You might
I
even
really
name,
liked doing it, and I liked having the music play and like listening to jazz still. Um, what you got going with your radio show? That's a new
so I,
thing. I didn't know that till yesterday.
yeah, the show's a couple years old now, and it airs each Sunday night at midnight on WDCB 90.9 FM and WDCB.org. You can also stream it anytime through the 2 week archive. And I have the pleasure of being able to play creative music and avant-garde music without limitation, you know, through the canon of everything that's happened the last 50, 60 years, plus new music. And it's a real treasure.
How did WDCB end up becoming an all jazz station? I mean, it's a college connected station, right? College of DuPage. And
It is, I, you know, I am not the historian or authority on that at all, Michael, but I believe they, for a long time, had a variety of music. And I think when it came that there weren't other stations that had jazz and blues, that it more and more became more jazz and blues to where it's now 24/7 jazz blues. And then we also have Americana, folk, and other things on the weeknights. But I think as other stations went over to other formats in Chicago, I think they just picked up more jazz and blues. They also picked up more jazz and blues DJs. You know, all of these shows are curated by local people who know the music, know the scene, and a lot of them have experience at other stations.
do you do your show from your house or do you go to the station?
I do it at the station.
Uh-huh. And you bring your records with you or your
Yes, and
CDs?
I draw from the library here, and then also, you know, some personal things. A lot of artists are sharing things electronically, so it's, you know, it's doing your homework ahead of time to download the files and be ready.
Well, speaking of homework, how do you do the homework and decide on what you're going to do on the show? I know for me doing this weekly show, it's a lot of thinking about contacting people, all that. You have to figure out what albums you're going to play, what tunes you're going to play, what artists you're going to profile. How much time do you put into that and share your experience doing it?
That's a good question. It's sometimes birthdays, sometimes anniversaries. I know for March I will play all Fred Anderson, and there's a whole lot of Fred Anderson to draw from. You know, early, late, duets, big ensembles, tributes to. You know, I could play a year of Fred Anderson if you wanted that, but March will be Fred Anderson. I try to focus, Michael, between things that haven't gotten a lot of play, players that maybe have faded from the common knowledge, and definitely a big focus on Chicago. I'll give you an example. There was a band that you had once or twice called Samana. It was the first all-female AACM group ever. Their CD is very hard to find. You can't buy it. No amount of money can you find that CD. But I was able to find the tracks and play those. And that's kind of strange because that was the 90s, right? You wouldn't think it would be that hard to find. But it was rewarding to find that group, which included Nicole Mitchell, and to be able to play those on air again.
That's good. Now, you've mentioned AACM a few times. So they got a long history. You want to share a little bit of that? People who are jazz fans know it. Others who are new to the jazz scene may not know it. It's really a wonderful part of Chicago music legend.
It is. And again, that's something I'm not the authority on, but starting in the early 60s with some of the founders here in Chicago, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, not for the creative music, but for the advancement of those individual creative musicians. Fred played in one of those first concerts and was certainly associated with it through his lifetime. And there's a New York branch. There's a great book on it by George Lewis, if you want to read the history of the AACM. And a lot of the young players that we follow today are members. It is a collective that supports their music.
We're talking with Andy Pierce. He is the host of a jazz show
called Another Place,
and that airs at midnight on WDCB 90.9 FM. And you can also get it online, right?
At WDCB.org.
Let's talk a little bit about some other people that we've mentioned here. Let's start with that photographer, Lauren Deutsch, who took the picture of Fred Anderson that was on the postcard I put out and on the jazz cover that you held up. Lauren she was my student at Columbia College, got involved in a lot of political things on the progressive end of things, and became head of the Jazz Institute for many years. You tell us a little bit about Lauren.
Lauren's a great fan of the music and documentarian. You know, her photos of the last, we'll say, decades capture music and musicians that largely went undocumented. And her more recent work of capturing movement and light and sound in her photography is really groundbreaking. If you look up Lauren Deutsch, you will see some of her work. And I believe she is planning an installation to incorporate music and images that'll be coming up soon at Tatsu Aoki's new venue. It's the Asian Improv Midwest out on Elston Avenue. It's their dojo for the taiko drumming.
I didn't know he had a new place. I did hear him on WZRD one time being interviewed, and I know there was something going on, but he actually has a club now, huh?
He does. It's on Elston, just southeast of Cicero.
And the name of it again?
Asian Improv Arts Midwest.
Okay, I like that. Well, Tatsu Aoki is another jazz player. Maybe you want to tell us a little about him. You know more about him than I do. I know he came to the Heartland and played a couple of times, and I do have a picture of him, which I'll find.
Tatsu's been telling his story pretty well recently. You know, he is an Asian American musician who came here from Japan with a great admiration for punk rock music, and also a little bit of history of jazz from his family and growing up. He came to this music and incorporated not only American jazz, but some of the traditional Japanese music and instruments that he knew. He has been playing and recording with Fred and other AACM players and other local players now for 3 or more decades, and just a great teacher and mentor to not only young musicians, but also film students as he teaches film at the Art Institute.
Jazz. We like jazz. You know, we had a series, which you probably attended some of back at the No Exit, back when we owned the No Exit in the Heartland. A fellow named William Perry, who has passed away, saxophone player. He approached us and asked if we could do a Sunday afternoon jazz set. And we did. And, he brought in Hamid Drake, and he brought in Nicole Mitchell, David Boykin, and, I'm blocking the name of the trumpet player that
Billy Brimfield.
Billy Brimfield, also the late great Billy Brimfield. Tell us a little about some of those people. Let's start with Hamid. Hamid has gotten a lot of recognition. He plays around the world. He's a warm and wonderful guy. He used to eat at the Heartland all the time, and he's out there working away still.
He is, and I think in the last year he did a lot of touring with David Murray. Hamid's just in demand everywhere in the world. People want to play and record with him, and he and Fred were both born in Monroe, Louisiana. Both of them of different generations, came to Evanston, Illinois as children. They played together very early on, and you mentioned William Perry. William Perry kind of came up under Fred. William was from Evanston as well. Really great saxophone player and composer. I've had to look really hard to find some of his work, but I do have some recordings with him.
Oh, I'd love to hear those, because all I remember, I don't know if we recorded anything over there or not. We'll see. There's a lot of archives at this end, but he was a wonderful guy. And Brimfield too.
Yeah, and Brimfield in late life had a couple CDs that I've found. They're not easily available, but he did have a couple CDs toward the end of his life, still playing very well. We have a lot of archival material with Billy and Hamid and Fred that we've donated to the Experimental Sound Studio Creative Archive. It's the Creative Audio Archive. That's over on Ravenswood. And so that's a place where these things are being digitized and preserved. Those VHS tapes and those old audio tapes weren't going to last forever. So this is an opportunity to kind of get those things safe. So that was kind of a COVID project for me, was getting that stuff out of the closet and over there to get digitized.
I'm going to keep working off these people that came and played at the Heartland and the No Exit. Let's talk about Nicole Mitchell, because she was there along with David Boykin. I think they were married at one time. I remember one of them had a daughter there that was listening to the music a whole lot. Nicole has gone on to get a lot of notoriety. You know more about the current state of the jazz world, so tell us what you know about Nicole Mitchell.
She's in North Carolina now, and she's very much in demand across the world, playing, teaching. She's published a book, and she is, one of the top players associated with Chicago and Fred and the Velvet of my generation, right? And she is now the mentor or the elder to the next generation. If you see Nicole listed in Chicago, you got to catch her, because she's here 2, 3, 4 times a year. But we don't have the embarrassment of riches that we had when she was here all of the time. Her recordings with her band Black Earth Ensemble are some of the best recent work of Delmark. And you can also see videos that she shot for Delmark, like at the New Velvet. So Josh Abrams, you mentioned David, those are all great players of my generation.
Well, someone who was a great promoter of jazz, who is no longer with us, but he ran the jazz showcase, is Joe Siegel. Yeah. And I remember, Joe Siegel was an important figure. You want to talk about his legacy a little bit?
Joe certainly beat everybody in endurance, right? And he somehow knew how to survive. I mean, how many different locations did the showcase have? How many fundraisers? How many, efforts for people that he did? And Wayne has carried on very, very well. Any business that has survived the pandemic and is still here to talk about is worth celebrating, and that's certainly the Jazz Showcase. And they've been open to all kinds of jazz, right? It's not just the straight ahead. I know when Fred was...
So the Jazz Showcase is still going on?
It is.
And who's running it now?
Wayne Siegel, Joe's son.
Oh, his kid.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I didn't realize that. And why don't you take this opportunity to talk about places people can go hear jazz in Chicago? You've mentioned a couple. You probably know a lot more than I do. And I'd love to hear because I'm in my old age, I'm starting to go out again at night.
Good. So to make sure I don't leave anyone out, I'm going to refer people to the jazz calendar at WDCB.org. That jazz calendar is free and open to everyone. And you can search by day there. You can search by venue. We also have a community calendar where you can search all those events, because as sure as I'm going to list some, and I will try, I'm going to leave somebody out. For the straight ahead, you want to go to the Showcase, Green Mill, Winters Jazz Club, and I'm probably and Andy's. And I'm probably forgetting 2 or 3, 4 or 5.
Well, let me throw in Le Piano, which is right here in Rogers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which took over once we sold the Heartland Cafe, the next owner sold the No Exit off, and it's now Le Piano, and they're doing jazz in there. One of the people we haven't talked about, and we'll use it as our finale for this segment, Andy, is the late, great Phil Coran. And, he used to, in his older years, he came to the Heartland a lot. He lived in the neighborhood. He was a very demanding and finicky guy in many ways, but also shared so many great moments, and was a pleasure to be around. I was glad we could feed him.
Phil was a teacher and performer and composer at another level. And I feel that those early members and founders of the AECM, they played creative music from the point that they were master musicians to begin with. They weren't playing outside because they didn't know the inside or they didn't know classical composition or playing. They played it from a point of great knowledge and education and ability, and they were composing or improvising something new. His work with his big bands and his work through his theater that he had on the South Side are just unmatched. So find his recordings and listen to them, because they are just some of the best work done in Chicago.
Andy Pierce, it was great to run into you yesterday. It was great to have you on the show today. You are piquing my interest. Maybe when you are going out to hear some music, let me know. I look for a ride. I go with you. I want to encourage everybody to check out your show. It's called Another Place. It's on WDCB 90.9 at midnight on Sundays. There it is. And we'll have you back.
Thanks,
Anytime
Michael.
you've got some good news, let me know. We're ready to have you.
Come on out to hear the Greg Ward Quartet. I wanted to tell you that lineup. 8 p.m. Saturday, March 23rd at Constellation. They're playing Fred Anderson compositions. You got Greg Ward on alto sax, Justin Dillard on piano, Ethan Fillion on bass, and Isaiah Spencer on drums. Come on out, 8 o'clock.
That's at the Constellation at 3111 Northwestern Avenue.
Yes.
A great place. I've been there. Okay, everybody.
See you there.
Thank you very much, Andy. And I want to thank all of our guests today. I want to thank all the people who make our show possible. I want to thank the people who were on last week. People may want to check out Jack Bloom on conservatism, race, and class, Victoria Cervantes on Honduras, and a little bit of sports from cousin Adam James. Coming up, we have Mariana Veropoulos, who is running for the Cook County Clerk of the Circuit Court. We'll be back next week with more Live from the Heartland.